good morning, afternoon, or evening to all of you joining us today. This is day 2's final session, which will be focusing on the challenges faced by minoritized groups in the polar sciences, as well as the importance of a more diverse community in making polar research stronger. If you've been with us from the start of the conference, you'll know that part of the tension of our conference was to challenge traditional notions of the Arctic as a static and remote place that is kind of somehow exempt from global developments. And so similarly, we are going to try and upend the very similarly static and homogeneous traditional idea of the polar research community as also dominated by a certain kind of person. So in this session, we are joined by a very vibrant, wonderful range of different organizations who are working precisely to bring attention to this issue and have a deep commitment to promoting equity and inclusion in the polar sciences. This includes Accessibility and Polar Research, a small group of disabled researchers aiming to signpost issues of accessibility, women in polar science, a network aiming to connect women and bring attention to gender disparity, and Polar Impact, an inclusive network of racial and ethnic minorities and allies, all operating in the polar sciences, of course. So for a brief kind of personal note, as someone who has dealt in part with the issues we'll be speaking here about, I know that I would have greatly benefited from knowing it was possible to discuss these things openly during my own MPhil, my master's. And it's difficult to know what right you have to advocate for yourself when you feel quite alone in doing so. I'm certainly not alone, and I'm sure that these feelings have been shared by many of you here at different points in your professional development. So to that end, let's make the session exactly that, which is a welcoming and informal space for what should be an engaging and supportive discussion.
As Elise said, that was a lovely introduction. My name is Angus, and I will be presenting the first half of AiPR's initial presentation. And we're looking at initiating change in the polar field and how you can make your research more accessible. So as Elise touched upon, we are a small group of disabled early career researchers, and each of us have diagnosed disabilities. And AiPR was set up during the pandemic, interestingly, so we're barely a year old, but most of us are kind of involved just so we can identify any key issues and adversities that disabled researchers face, and then how we can signpost resources and how we can make institutions and organizations be more inclusive. So one of our first initiatives was to identify how AiPR can help most and what key issues need addressing first. And in particular, we found two issues that really kind of hit home with a lot of people. The first is fieldwork. There are these outdated blanket policies for fieldwork that are often based on a one-size-fits-all, two-dimensional diagnosis, actually ban certain individuals and researchers with disabilities from going to the field, which is of course an issue in polar science. And of course you can be a polar scientist without doing field work, but it's something that we feel really needs to have more attention garnered to it. And then conference accessibility is another one, especially physical conferences, because that can be really demanding for people with disabilities. And so we want to really advocate for disabled coping mechanisms to be ensured in those conferences. And ultimately we kind of found that these two key issues really discourage early career researchers from entering the polar field initially. And so one thing that AiPR likes to do is be quite candid with our experiences. And in particular, I feel that my disabilities make me a really creative and better scientist. So I faced adversity through multiple organizations and institutions, ultimately saying, you can't come and join us, disabled researchers or researchers with learning disabilities aren't capable enough to do science. And I've had that written to me from several institutions, but in actuality, the polar field is missing out on some incredible talent by being really exclusionary. And for me in particular, with my learning difficulties, I feel as though I can become a more creative scientist because whilst I do take more time with statistics, I can really learn their creative application and their ecological relevance on top of having a different perspective on multiple statistical analyses. So that's my take on it anyways, but I know Charlotte has a particular other take on her experiences within the polar field too.
Yeah, hi guys. So my experience, as Elise said in my introduction, I was born with a hearing impairment and I didn't really feel like it bothered me too much growing up through school. Everyone was kind of aware of it. And I just made the accommodations myself, so sitting closer to the front and all those sorts of things. But then it wasn't until when the pandemic hit and everything moved to remote learning online, I started to really struggle, because lecturers or academics would be using recycled content from previous years and the captioning would not be suitable. So it would be recorded lectures in the large lecture theatre and they wouldn't have had their own mic put on. So it would be loads of background noise. You can hear everyone moving around, the lecturers moving around. So it meant that any form of automated captioning software that I had, whether it was already on the recording or any that I was given through disability student allowance, wasn't able to actually pick up what was being said. So I raised this issue with a few academics who I struggled with, and quite frankly, they said that they didn't have the time to fix this. So I had to then spend a lot more time of my time and spend even more effort making sure that I could understand this content by having to listen several times, make loads of different notes, use so many different softwares. So I've got a little bit of a cough now. So yeah, I found that it made me more innovative. So I would be able to find all these different ways to make sure that I could get this content across, and made me work more collaboratively with other people, despite being in a lockdown, just mainly because I had to double check that I was hearing the content correctly. So yeah, that's with my experience recently. So as Angus said, one of our first initiatives was to really highlight the key issues that were being that other early career researchers or academics have felt there are within accessibility. So we put out a questionnaire quite early on, and the questionnaire gave us the results of which Angus was talking about, the blanket policies and the conference accessibility. So I personally have more training within digital accessibility. So after I finished university, I did an internship at Southampton University working within digital accessibility and helping academics make their content more accessible, whether that be through alternative text, color contrast, heading styles, and using meaningful hyperlinks. So I was really passionate for when this network started to be able to continue promoting and advocating for digital accessibility. So we ran a webinar I believe it was in February, called Creating Accessible Documents, where we talked through the key issues that we found. And then quite recently, we've also made our own color palette. So we've made this color palette and it follows the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So this is to help with when the color contrast isn't sufficient enough on PowerPoints. So, or as you can see on the colors on the screen, the first 4 colors work with any white text on front of them, including the off-white one that's at the end. And likewise, the off-white one works as a background with all those other colors as the text colors. So this is something I personally felt we really needed to do, just so then there's that option out there for people who are trying to make a PowerPoint, but they don't know the best color scheme to use and they don't know how to make sure they've got sufficient contrast. We've also given a talk within the Scott Polar Research Institute about our experiences, similar to what we're talking about today. But yeah, one of the main lessons I think we've learned is that making mistakes is part of learning to be accessible, and accessibility definitely is a marathon, not a sprint. You'll never reach something being completely 100% accessible, because there'll always be something that will interfere or something new that will crop up. So these are, sorry,
go for it, Charlotte. I was just seeing if my slide moved because my screen had a bit of a fit.
Well, good. So let me just, so these are some useful resources that we've found recently that might be able for people who want to learn more about accessibility within polar science or just science in general. And as you can see, there's a quote on here which we found and we all feel very strongly about, and that's: "We are expected to work extra hard to fit into the current academic culture, so we expect similar effort from institutional leaders to think beyond legally required accommodations and support all scientists." So it's essentially saying that we have to put in all this extra work. We expect academics to reciprocate that effort, so to make it a more collaborative kind of experience. Then there's also the Creative Tuition Collective report. So I know, Angus, you are quite involved with Creative Tuition, am I right?
Yes, I know Lara really well, who's the CEO of Creative Tuition. And this report came out just at the end of last year that I know myself and all of the other committee members in AiPR were a part of Polar Horizons. And actually, I know some of the other speakers today were also a part of that. So I'd really suggest this read so you can get an understanding of how multiple minoritized groups are treated in polar science and see what initiatives are being currently executed. I really recommend that report, but please email us or anybody and we can send all of these around. Our email's at the end of the presentation, so do contact us if you need these links.
But with that, I'll stop your PowerPoint sharing if that's all right, and we'll move on over to Andrea Herbert from Women in Polar.
All right, great. Thank you for the introduction, and good morning from New Zealand to everybody here. I'm very happy to share with you our network, Women in Polar Science, WIPS, and specifically the 100 Polar Women Project. So I'm presuming everybody can see my screen. Is that correct? Okay, fantastic. All right, so why a women-focused project? And I'm sure that I'm preaching to the converted, but we can boil it down to two words, basically. Representation matters. We all need role models and people that we can identify with across various vectors. And as a group, women are, of course, not homogeneous, but we need to acknowledge that we are diverse and that related to this diversity, we all face varying degrees of challenges. And so WIPS wants to address that. These are some of the things that we used to define ourselves with, because of course, being a woman is not the only thing that defines us. And this list is not exhaustive. It's just a sample of things that we can use to define us and identify ourselves. And it matters because how other people perceive us based on how we identify and define ourselves, that will directly impact how we experience things. And gender is a really good way to start addressing this, but we also need to take a look at inclusivity as a whole and consider the impact of intersectionality on our experiences. So WIPS comes in at this point. It was founded 8 years ago, 2014, by these 4 women. One of them in the left upper hand corner, Dr. Renuka Badhe, is the director of the European Polar Board. And I saw that in your previous presentation, an article that she had co-authored appeared. So what you see here is a poster that was made in the first years of the project. And the aim of Women in Polar Science is that we want to connect, we want to support, and we want to inspire. And we want to build a network of women to do so. We have to, I have to say that since the inception of Women in Polar Science, we've actually expanded into including support. And I have yet to come up with a better word. I don't quite like the word support jobs, science and support. I don't want to call it non-academic because I don't like defining things with a negative or in relation to another thing, and I'm still thinking on it. But it's important to say that we are looking at science and support positions, women in these positions. And also just to make sure that when we say polar, we mean, of course, both the Arctic and the Antarctic, and possibly also the third pole. Since its inception, we've had, or WIPS has done several events. For example, at the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research, SCA, which happens every 2 years, I want to say, in Malaysia and in Switzerland. They've had panel discussions and workshops on inclusivity. They co-founded the Antarctic Science Wiki Bomb together with SCA, which has resulted, at least at that point, possibly still, in more women actually being featured on Wikipedia, more women scientists, women polar scientists being featured than men, which is a nice break from otherwise a very male focused or men focused presentation. So the goal of WIPs is to increase representation and showcase the breadth of the work that women do in the polar regions. We want to, of course, promote diversity and inclusiveness for institutions, for organizations and in events. And we want to strengthen connections for women within this network. And of course, as an overall goal, we want to inspire a new generation, or the next generation, the next couple generations of polar scientists and support workers, women working in polar positions. See, I'm tripping myself up just because I'm still thinking on how to better phrase that. So this is our website. If you haven't been, please do check it out. I would like to draw your attention to two things. It's a work in progress, I have to say. I joined Women in Polar Science and Support about a year ago, and I'm not, I didn't do social media before I started doing social media for women in polar science. And I'm not necessarily intuitively tech connected. So I'm doing the best I can on the website, but we do value feedback from anybody who visits it, and especially value feedback, for example, also for this point here, research, where we collect relevant literature to do with gender and the polar regions, and always keen on getting suggestions for what to include. So please do feel free when you come across something to contact us, and I will very happily do my best to actually add that. And then also videos is another feature of the website. We have a good number of videos from a couple years ago where we interview women in polar science positions just for like a couple of minutes, and they talk about what they do and how they got into their field, and it's well worth a watch. So I encourage you to take a look at that. But let me talk about our current project, which is the 100 Polar Women project that we started on the 1st of December, which is Antarctica Day. And our goal is to, within the span of 1 year, publish profiles or stories of 100 women from both poles, all 3 poles, to talk about what their work is and what motivated them and what keeps them going. Our goal is to be as inclusive in terms of geography, age group, career stage, discipline, and background. And so that's a balancing act. We're about halfway through now, and I will get to that in a couple of slides. So that is definitely a work in progress. So this is a sample profile that you can see here. And I should also say that this is possible because of generous support from the Curtis and Edith Munson Foundation, who are our funders, the Ocean Foundation, who supports us with fiscal support in the US, and SCAR, who supports the project. So if you take a look at this tab here, this is where you can access the 100 Polar Women project. And there's 3 ways that we find women. So we encourage self-nomination. You can do that here. Once you get to the website, you can contact us. This will lead you to a Google Doc in which you can put in your answers, and then you send us a photo. You can nominate somebody else, which means that I will usually then reach out to that person. Or the third way of doing that is that I'm headhunting people, basically. So I will do some research online and basically Googling it or looking at specific organizations and then contacting people. So you can see, that it works. I have to say, we have lots of responses, and I often get responses to my inquiries. But yeah, it does also rely on people finding us and then self-nominating. So you can see here, it's basically, actually, let me go to the next one, which is myself. I use myself to kick it off. So we asked for a few demographic informations, and usually you should also see social media handles here, but because I am not doing social media, you wouldn't see that here, but this would be one way of making the network, of getting in contact with people whose profile you may have read on the project website and who you would like to contact. So this would be one way of doing it. We asked for just a short blurb about the work that you do, about what motivates you, and then a short and pithy message to the world. And so I wanted to draw your attention to this age factor. So we also ask about age, and I know everybody will have a different opinion about that. But I have had feedback from women who question why it is even there. And so my personal point of view is that I want to, make it normalize talking about age. And I do like to see, women who are actually, I'm now 40. This was from last year. I do like to see women who kind of fit into my age group. But I also understand why people would skip it. And a handful of women have actually skipped that, which is no problem. That is voluntary information. But it did, I hadn't actually considered before that some women would find it unnecessary to have it included here. So this is one of my learnings from being halfway through this 1-year project, is that is actually possibly not as unproblematic as I had imagined beforehand. And you can see here, while we want to be as balanced as possible in terms of age groups, that's actually not quite, it hasn't quite worked out. The majority of our people, of our women that we've portrayed are 40 years and younger. And I have more trouble finding women, 40 plus, 50 plus, and even harder, of course, 60 plus. And there might be several reasons for that. I'm guessing it is because some women don't want to take the spotlight away from the younger generation and want to give feel like that, they don't need to necessarily self-promote and may want to help highlight other people. But for me, it's quite important also to see various career stages, which often correlate with age. Not always, of course, but in many cases, it does correlate with age. And so it's also possible that some women in the 50, 60 plus age group may not use social media as much and may therefore not find us or not be interested in participating. But yeah, that's my goal for the next 50 women, is to hopefully make this a little bit more balanced. What I'm also finding is that geographically, there's some work to be done. So in this corridor here, more or less, I haven't been able to find women who are either from the Middle East, from parts of Africa. We have, and also some in the pipeline, South African women. South Africa has an Antarctic program. Possibly, I think it might be the only country in Africa that does have an Antarctic program. But yeah, I would need to confirm that. And then Australia, New Zealand, etc. And that's possibly because we ask for nationality, not place of residence, because I do have lots of colleagues here in New Zealand and over in Australia, but some of them, or many of them, are not actually Australian or New Zealanders. So that might be some of the reasons why geographically we're also a little bit unbalanced. And also it's possible because my personal network doesn't necessarily include, it does include Arctic people. I'm very interested in Arctic people, of course, ideally that make up half of our women, but my network is more Antarctic focused, and that could be one of the reasons. And also I was told, because we're very keen to also highlight Indigenous women's work, and you don't have Indigenous people in Antarctica, so of course there would be an Arctic category. But when I reached out to them, there was reluctance to engage. So I often don't get responses. And I was told that it's not necessarily a cultural trait to be self-promoting and self-nominating. So 2 of those categories would already eliminate themselves. I'm very keen to hear from Indigenous women and to feature Indigenous women. So I will continue trying, but currently I'm not doing super good in that part. And then a last imbalance that I wanted to share with you is disciplines. As a social scientist myself, as an anthropologist, of course, I'm very keen to also promote the social sciences and the humanities in the profiles. But so far, and I know this is not a very good pie chart, so far it's been mostly biology and glaciology, which makes sense, of course, but there is more to polar work than those categories. And when I look at this graph here, which looks at Antarctic fields or disciplines that are heavily featured in Antarctic work, which comes from a research on COVID-19 and the impact on Antarctic research that we did recently, you can see here that, yeah, humanities and social sciences are in the minority. So it would take extra work promoting and recruiting people who work in non-natural sciences fields. And then also most of the women that we have work in science, which makes sense because that is in our title. And not so many in support. About a fourth of the women that we managed to feature work in support jobs, and I want to increase that. And then also when I counted that for my halfway through report, I was really surprised to see that 85 or possibly 87% of the women that we featured either have a PhD or are working towards a PhD. And we don't want to be exclusive, absolutely not want to be exclusive towards women who either don't want to do a PhD or who just have either no access or just no interest in doing that. So I need more non-PhD track and PhD women as well. So Elise, when you asked, oh,
sorry, Andrea, I just wanted to quickly let you know that it'd be good to turn to the discussion soon. So if you're nearing the end of your presentation, just to let you know. I'm
very close. So one of the things that you asked, what's positive about being a woman? I just think about that. I mean, there's many things that's positive or that are positive about being a woman, but I found this graph from women in STEM. So it is related, indirectly related to polar sciences. And they say that women in their work environment support one another. And that's also what women in polar science is about. We want to support one another. So there is a sense of solidarity, which is of course positive. And personally, I have the impression that it's getting better, even though there are setbacks. But raising awareness, which is what we all are doing, is the first step, in my perspective, to to bring about change. And that's one example. These are the female heads of delegations at the recent ATCM Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting in Berlin, Germany. So 13 women, which is pretty amazing. So this is my last slide, and these are the categories of women that we are very interested in representing more of in the second half of the project. And yeah, if you know somebody, if you identify as such, and if you are keen to share that with us, please get in touch over or via our social media channels.
So for our last speakers from Polar Impact, we have Julia Andreasen and Harleena Franklin. Are you both?
Hi, my name is Harleena, and I'm here with Julia, and we're super excited to talk to you today about the group they're both co-organizers for, called Polar Impact. So if you Google Polar Impact, you'll find our website, polarimpactnetwork.org, and you'll see this statement that Polar Impact is an inclusive network of racial and ethnic minorities and allies in the polar research community. We were founded by our friend Prem Gill at the University of Cambridge in 2019. The statement at the bottom of the slide is a quote from him. Polar Impact began just as a support platform on Twitter run by a single person, and now is being led by a team of co-organizers, volunteers, and donors doing a range of activities with the aim of to go beyond discussions and take action to change the face of polar research and exploration. So I joined Polar Impact in 2021 when they shared some info about a conference called Polar Horizons. I realized it was a support that I was really missing, and I was totally hooked. And then this year I started my PhD, and my department participated in URGE on learning racism in geoscience. So I've learned it's really important to have these resources that we can turn to.
And then I joined Polar Impact in January of 2021 after Prem and I collaborated on some Antarctic research and found a lot of commonalities when talking about the cryospheric community. And in the depths of the pandemic, joining Polar Impact was crucial in connecting me with polar enthusiastic people who also cared about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So let's talk a little bit about the main motivators for this organization. And this idea, what comes to mind when you hear the word Polar Explorer? So just kind of take a second and think about, what first pops into your mind with that. Quite often we hear of polar explorers like these two men on the right, a Norwegian and a British explorer, but you may or may not recognize this person on the left. This explorer is Nobu Shirase from Japan, who at the same time as the other explorers led the first Japanese Antarctic expedition in 1910 to 12. Tracy returned to Japan in June of 1912 to much local acclaim, but the rest of the world showed really little interest in these exploits. Despite the expedition being recorded in 1913, an English version of the story wasn't translated until 2011. As part of Polar Impact's efforts, it's our goal to broaden the recognition of polar explorers to include these histories that are often ignored, like the Maori people, who are considered to be the first group to traverse Antarctic waters as early as the 7th century. So when we think of Western expeditions to Antarctica, we need to remember that these trips were reserved for white men only. Women and people of color were often not included or supported in their endeavors. This slowly began to change in 1935 with Carolyn Mickelson, and then George Washington Gibbs Jr., and eventually with Barbara Hillary, which we can talk more about later if you like. Of course, the polar research community has made huge efforts to change, but it's still struggling to be a place that's welcome to everyone. In late September of 2021, AGU Cryosphere section distributed a letter about that year's fellow nominees, and the fellows section's committee's decision to decline the recommended 3 nominees to the AGU Union Fellows Committee for 2021 due to lack of diversity in the pool. All the nominees were white men. Noting that achieving diversity, equity, inclusion is one of the key AGU strategic goals, and that they aim to ensure gender balance in nominations recommended for consideration by the Union Fellow Committee. And this situation only scrapes the surface of what racial and ethnic minority members of the community have to face, and it's Polar Impact's goal to create a network where individuals can share experiences, obstacles, and successes in a safe and supportive environment. So with these goals in mind, we hope that the picture that you think of when you hear the words polar explorer can look something like this. Matthew Henson in the center, who was an Arctic explorer and the first African-American to reach the North Pole, as well as contemporary explorers such as our Polar Impact members, Amber Wendler and Shannon Harewood Malone on the left and on the right, and help redefine what it means to be a polar explorer. So to look closer at what Polar Impact does as an organization, our mission is to support, connect, and highlight the stories of Black, Asian, Indigenous, people of color, and minority ethnic professionals in the polar research community, all of which is made possible by volunteers spanning from undergrads to professors in institutions all over the world.
Yeah, so as a volunteer-run organization, we build our community by providing free membership to everyone, no matter how they identify. We also maintain partnerships with media outlets, as well as the NSF Office of Polar Programs to build our initiative's reach. And it's important that we support our members by sharing opportunities through our platforms, as well as building resources on our website. So in addition to membership, we are also motivated to connect those in the polar research community through partnerships with polar institutions and media producers, as well as quarterly virtual public lectures and through monthly private virtual gatherings. So although Harleena and I are giving this presentation to you today, Polar Impact's efforts are made possible by an incredible team of individuals. Our co-organizers include our founder, Prem, Ismara, Ali, Ariel, Jackie, myself, Pearl, and Harleena. And Polar Impact is also made possible through the amazing work of volunteers from all over the globe who assist the co-organizers as well as take lead on some of our projects themselves. So I just want to note that as one of 3 white women on the leadership team, we have been given an important opportunity to continuously strive to be better allies in this space. So being an ally means educating yourself through learning about the breadth of the racial and ethnic minority experience, as well as using self-reflection to challenge assumptions, attitudes, and beliefs by bringing unconscious biases to light. So in this organization, that also means knowing when to step up as well as when to step back. Okay, so we have a plethora of projects that we're currently working on, and here's a list to just name a few. And I won't go into depth on all of them, but I will feature a couple just to give you a sense of how Polar Impact is engaging with our members and our community. And if anyone has any interest in volunteering with us, please let me know and we can share a more detailed document on our projects after the presentation. And for our volunteers, we make it a point to emphasize that volunteering can exist in whatever capacity works best for you and allows you to cater towards your strengths or projects that you find most interesting. So as a volunteer, you could either take on a project and lead it with other volunteer assistants, or assist on a project with specific tasks that already has a lead. And both are great options. Different projects have different needs, and participating or leading can really help individuals at any career stage. And this helps them develop their leadership skills as well as network with a ton of amazing people and organizations. So to start, our features are one of our primary ways of highlighting the amazing work that Polar Impact members and those in the community are doing. So we hope to answer that question, or to change the answers to that initial question that we asked, which is, what comes to mind when you hear the words polar explorer, to really include historical and contemporary polar figures who come from a wide range of backgrounds, education, and perspectives. Our features are also important to us because we value highlighting lived experiences in our public engagement. So our features require several roles, including reaching out to potential featured individuals, compiling their interview responses onto our website, and then highlighting quotes from their feature to post on social media. We also have our quarterly newsletter, which is another way that we enjoy engaging with our members. And the newsletter is produced by an awesome team who collaborate on the layout and content in order to share exciting news and opportunities within the polar impact sphere, and to our members on a quarterly basis. We also have, we like to support our members by sharing opportunities through our website. So currently we highlight these 4 resource panels for students, kids, jobs, and mental health. And we're currently in the process of expanding these resources to include a field survival guide led by our volunteers, Caleb and Emma, as well as brainstorming ways to expand our mental health resources. In terms of social media, we think it's super important to stay connected to our members and the polar community through Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And we often use these resources to highlight our features and job threads, and are always thinking of new ways to engage with the public. And then we have our mentorship program, which is a way to connect our members and provide a safe space for individuals to really seek advice, provide guidance, network, and more. And creating the mentorship program has really required thorough time and work to ensure that all involved feel like they're in a productive and helpful and safe space. And then we have a new and exciting project that we're working on now, and it's really just gearing up, and everyone's extremely excited to work on it. And it's called our Polar Postcard Projects. So the polar postcards will involve creating a set of 15 postcards, which will be sent out from a polar base to inner city schools. Currently, all of those schools are located in the UK, but we're hoping to expand from that. And we hope to use this project as a way to really bridge the gap between polar institutions and school-age children, to really help bring awareness to this super awesome field of study. And then we've also been thinking of ways to highlight polar impact in a way that's accessible and comfy. So through merchandise, we hope to come up with cool and fun designs that capture polar impact, as well as raise funds to support other projects and endeavors. And then we also have, we're really trying to expand our graphics team and highlight art that's present in this community and that a lot of people can contribute to. We're in the process of also building an online gallery and hope that an emphasis on art within a scientific field will really expand the accessibility and interest of polar research. So we really welcome all artistic endeavors, interests, and mediums. And then our graphics can also be used in ways to advertise our events and highlight the achievements of Polar Impact members. Another great project that we have is our coffee and tea. So these events are monthly private virtual gatherings exclusively for Black, Asian, Indigenous people of color, and minority ethnic polar explorers and professionals. And this project is really great because it's been super successful in really connecting Polar Impact members and creating a safe space for sharing and learning, specifically during these tough few years of the pandemic.
And then another project of ours, which is my project, is the Polar Flags, where we take a Polar Impact flag and we send it out to members who are going out to do field work. So they can take a picture with the flag and then sign it and then send it on to other members, and we can see how far they go. So we have a lot of awesome projects and endeavors. If you're interested, please help us take action. You can go to our website, polarimpactnetwork.org, and find our Patreon, where you can make a monetary donation and help us fund our initiative. or if you would like to donate your time, please let us know and we can send you our volunteer form, and you can fill out things, find opportunities to share skill sets and interests. And then finally, don't forget to join our membership and sign up for the newsletter. It's free and it's open to everyone.